Hello beautiful people, my name is Venti and today at long last I'm going to be bringing you my review of The Savior's Sister by Jenna Moreci. If you've been following my channel for the past year, then you know that The Savior's Sister was one of my most anticipated books for the entirety of 2020, and I was lucky enough to receive an ARC a bit in exchange for reviews. That's what I'm going to be bringing you today. The short story of it is I'm absolutely not disappointed. The Savior's Sister lived up to just about every expectation I had, every hope, every dream, and I'm going to do my best to explain to you guys why I liked it so much without spoilers, because this is still a very, very new release that I highly recommend that you pick up. Before I get into my review of The Savior's Sister, however, I do want to give a quick disclaimer slash caveat, which is that this is a companion novel to The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci. As The Savior's Sister is a companion, it is exceedingly difficult to talk about it without giving away some things about The Savior's Champion, specifically a big plot twist reveal that happens at the end of this book. So if you haven't read The Savior's Champion and you don't want to be spoiled as to the end of this book, this review might not be for you. Instead, I will leave you with a brief synopsis of this, and then I will urge you to check my description box below where I have links where you can purchase The Savior's Champion and The Savior's Sister. So The Savior's Champion follows a young man named Tobias Kaya. After a freak accident kills his father and disables his sister, and Tobias is forced to quit his apprenticeship in art to pursue laboring in order to feed his family, Tobias stops caring for much of anything. He's not big on taking days off or friendship or parties, and he most certainly does not care about the ruler of Thesson, a woman with God's blessed power known as the Savior. Until one day, his sister's pain becomes worse, and the only way for Tobias to earn enough money to heal her or find her any sort of comfort in the world is to enter the Sovereign's Tournament, a competition where eligible young men from all across Thesson compete to win this Savior's hand. Tobias enters and is chosen and wins his family the money, but at a great cost to himself. He's thrown into a true den of snakes with 19 other men who are cool and calculating and brutal and violent, all ready to kill and die to rule alongside the Savior herself. The one thing Tobias doesn't believe he will ever find in this tournament, despite it being a tournament for winning a woman's hand in marriage, he does not believe that amongst any of the dark and the violence and the ugliness of the realm, he will find love. So in one of the Savior's personal court, one of her sisters, a healer girl with a sharp tongue named Layla, begins to break down his walls and soften his heart and earn his friendship and eventually something a little more than that. Tobias is probably more shocked than anybody. And though he expects danger to both himself and Layla for committing basically treason, he's in no way prepared for the dark truths that are coming for him now. In The Savior's Sister, we get the other side of the story as we follow Layla. In TSC, we know her as the healer girl who stole Tobias's heart, but in this story, we know her as Layla to Salvitras, the eponymous savior of Thesson and supposedly ruler of the realm. In theory, Layla should be the most powerful person in all of Thesson, both because she has a right by blood to rule and inherit her throne, and also because she has the God-given magic of the Savior literally running through her veins. She is, in theory, adored by all, feared by some, except for her father. He hates her, wants to overthrow her, and is prepared to kill her in order to get his way. Throughout her youth, Layla is basically shackled by her father. Her power is wrested from her by his corrupt Senate, and rather than being able to go among her people and learn their needs and hopes and desires, she's held basically caged within the confines of her palace. When Layla comes of age and the Sovereign's Tournament is announced, she finds out that her father plans to use the tournament to lure assassins into the house and have them take care of his little savior problem for him. Severely lacking in allies and quickly running out of time, Layla realizes that she must infiltrate the Sovereign's Tournament and find out who the assassins are and get rid of them before they have a chance to get rid of her. On top of that, she knows she has to work hard and fast to root out the corruption within the Senate that her father has planted around her. But when she finds herself falling for Tobias, one of the men in the tournament who isn't there to, end her life, her father finds himself another target for murder. And on top of finding a way to save her realm and even her own life, Layla has to find out how to save him too. Now that you know what the books are all about, let's get into my review. Starting with, I think, the writing and the concept of TSS as a companion, not a sequel, but sort of a sequel, because that sort of colors the rest of the review, at least in my opinion. So I'm of the belief that every sequel, and that includes companions, has to build upon the world and plot and characters introduced in the first book. Whatever the stakes are in book 1, they have to be heightened in book 2. And as a companion novel, I think The Savior's Sister is an absolute success. It does all of the above with aplomb. And starting with the writing, I think that A beautiful thing that Jenna Maressi did was in differentiating the voice of Tobias, who was our protagonist and who we followed in TSC, versus Layla, who's our protagonist and who we followed in TSS. The writing style that she used throughout both books remained relatively direct and got the point across very well. It made both books absolute page turners. But what really stuck out to me was how literal things were in TSC. Tobias is a layman. He doesn't have the sort of worldly point of view that Layla does. And so the way that he sees the world is very much shaped by that. As an artist, he does see the beauty in some things, though I think maybe that was a little bit lacking in the first book. But he's definitely miles and miles away from the sort of more calculating and quiet mind, and definitely more raised in nobility mind that Layla has. And the writing of her story is very much shaped by her as a character. Things she pays attention to, the way that she thinks through situations after being put inside of them, the way she goes over conversations with other people and perceives slights in things in a way that Tobias would just absolutely not notice. It would go straight over his head, was fascinating to me. It was almost like the books were written by two different people, but really it was just a masterful division of character. Because the writing wasn't overly flowery and verbose and bogged down with pages and pages of world building or info dumping, the story managed to go by very, very quickly. And in fact, it sort of helped alleviate a little bit one of the problems I had with the story. I guess that's a good segue to move into plot. So one of the issues I had with TSS that I didn't have as much in TSC was the pacing of the story. I can only imagine that it's exceedingly difficult to keep timelines lined up for two separate characters, especially when one of the timelines is in a published book, so you can't really retcon any part of it. And double especially when the two characters whose stories you're telling are so intertwined, and since their love story makes up such a core element of the series so far, it would be exceedingly difficult to not have romantic-y scenes and have the scenes that are shared between them be rather crucial moments of both stories. But for all that I loved the wonderful Layla moments in TSS, and I absolutely did, let's not mistake me, I did think that the rest of the story sort of felt stilted, sort of as though it were waiting to get from one of those points to the other. Rather than the relatively external plot of, you know, man versus big fighting evil tournament that Tobias had, Layla's core conflict is much more complex, and I absolutely enjoyed that. I love me some political intrigue. I love when the scope of a plot expands beyond what we're expecting. So I was super, super excited to see Senate meetings, for example, and see those small slights that Layla would have to deal with and sort of swallow down before, you know, holding her own and getting back at these senators. And we definitely did get that, but for whatever reason, it just didn't flow as naturally for me from point A to point B. This was definitely alleviated from about the midpoint onward, but at the beginning of the book, I was having some issues sort of being swept along with the plot, if that makes sense. Not because the plot was uninteresting, but because it felt like there was two very distinct plots happening. One, which was a love story, and one, which was a deep, dark political fantasy, and they just weren't braiding as well as I would have liked for them to. Again, I realize that Layla's story is far more complex, so these are two far more complex things to braid together than Tobias's survive the labyrinth, fall in love with a really pretty girl. But it was a struggle for me at first. I also would have liked to see a little bit more foreshadowing of some of those final, like, gotcha moments at the end. There were two major, like, big twists, one of which I enjoyed sort of being blindsided for, but there was another one where I thought that foreshadowing could have been done a little more effectively earlier on in the story so that it would have been possible to guess who a certain character who betrayed another character was. As it is in the story, I don't think that it's possible even to guess, even if you're the closest reader in the whole world. And maybe I'm just an idiot who didn't read the story closely enough and was focused too much on the romance. But I personally didn't believe that this twist got the foreshadowing it could have deserved. And I do believe that the foreshadowing and the ability to sort of maybe start making some of these connections and clues would have made it a more enjoyable and satisfying reading experience, as well as sort of speeding up the plot and braiding certain story links together. That said, I still thoroughly enjoyed the storyline. I loved seeing Layla at the very start of the story as a young child, only slowly beginning to realize the sort of den of snakes that she was in and deciding not to be a damsel in distress, but deciding, hey, no, I'm gonna live. I am necessary for the survival of my people, and I'm not gonna let anyone take that away from me or from them. I think it was a beautiful way to establish the core strength of her very early on, and I absolutely enjoyed following her as a character from that point onward. Additionally, I loved seeing the political intrigue that we did get to see. I loved seeing Layla's interactions within the court and having to sort of guess and second guess everything everyone said to one another, because God, they're just such a bunch of lying assholes. Say what you will about the people who were within the Sovereign's tournament, but in their own selfish, brutish ways, most of them were relatively honest about what kind of monsters they were, because they didn't really have anyone to hide from. In TSS, everyone has the motive and mostly the ability to hide from everyone else. And additionally, because no, I will never get over to Layla, and no, I will never stop shipping them, I do love the expansions on certain scenes that we get from TSC, but seen through Layla's point of view in TSS. It was so cute to see that she had the crush on Tobias first and had to sort of work to get him to like and trust her a little bit more than he had to work for her. And in certain scenes where in TSC it seemed like Layla came out of nowhere, it became very evident why she was there and what she was doing. And no, she wasn't just there to romance Tobias, she had her own shit to do, and I really enjoyed that. Oftentimes romantic interests, and especially women, occasionally can fall prey to the whole prop love interest thing, and that's not to say that Layla was even a little bit of that in TSC. I wouldn't have liked the story nearly as much if she were, but any illusions that somebody might have had of that were absolutely shattered and shot out of the water in TSS. She's a bamf. She gets her own shit done, and if she's gonna fall in love along the way, then absolutely she's gonna go for it. But falling in love is not the goal here. Survival and thriving and protecting her land is the goal here, and you can't help but root for her. In addition, despite not really being allowed outside of her palace for shitty dad trying to overthrow his daughter reasons, Layla's point of view helped us expand upon the entire world, not just of Thesson, but of the allied realms beyond its borders, and I thought that was incredibly cool. So moving on to world building. Again, I think the expansion of the scope of the world is another key element to Layla being introduced as the point of view character, and again points to the necessity of TSS as a companion novel. A bunch of new information is introduced in this one that I think has greater implications for the series as a whole that I'm very excited to explore in future installations. Where Tobias is a farmer and relatively poor and doesn't really have eyes on anything in the world outside of his village and what his family is going to eat the next day, Layla is, despite all of the shackles placed on her, still a politician in training. Her knowledge of the customs of the people beyond Thesson is fascinating to see. From the Kavarians to the Erythuanians? I'm gonna have that written out here. I can pronounce it in my head, but not out loud. She knows the customs, she knows what is acceptable where and to whom, and she knows which alliances are more tenuous and which ones are more sturdy. She has to know this so she can figure out who is providing her father with external support, whether financial or military, etc., and who, therefore, she cannot trust to support her when she makes a claim for her own throne. Because of Layla's point of view, we get a little bit of a closer look at these distant realms. If not in person, which I think we will in later books, then at the very least in like a theoretical way to prepare us for the external world that we're gonna see in the future. In a way, I think it made sense for there not to be much external world building in the first book. And by external, I mean world building that is not sort of concentrated to the literal events and locations happening on page, because Layla's scope of power and influence is so much greater than Tobias's. She will one day be a player on the grand world stage, ergo de facto she needs to know about the grand world stage, and ergo de facto, as we are following her in this story, we get to know more about it too, and it's immensely fascinating to see how each of these different cultures interact with one another. I will say that I wish that we had seen a little bit more of Layla using some of that knowledge and knowledge about those cultural differences when the emissaries come in the middle of the tournament to the Palace of Thesson. At present, we're still only seeing, I think, a rather rudimentary version of what each of these different places values and what their monarchs value above all, and how they behave and how they dress, etc. And I wish just a little bit more time and attention, maybe like a paragraph's worth of like words in total, was given to showing how people from these various places behave, perhaps even in contrast to one another or in contrast with the Thessians. And perhaps it's because I'm a little bit of a slut for world building, but I would have, at the very least, liked to know a little bit more about each sort of nation's, if there is like a national religion, their views to the greater celestial power. Because as we know, some sort of magic exists if Layla, the literal savior, has, you know, her glowing skin and the ability to heal an entire nation of people. I just think it would be fascinating to, at the very least, use religion as a sort of greater cornerstone of world building, given that the magic system of one of the central protagonists of the story is so related to a sort of religiously given divine right to magic. Speaking of characters though, let's get into my absolute favorite part of reviewing. Let's talk about Layla. I love a competent, caring badass. Layla is all of those things and more. Some of the things that bothered me a little bit with Layla in TSC, such as keeping her emotions a little bit closer to her chest and her deep abiding stubbornness, make a lot more sense given the context of her life and seeing her existence in TSS. What before felt like a contrived way to make our main couple argue now is very clearly a product of her upbringing and her precarious position in this court of lions and snakes and just bad folks. Of course, she's impatient and stubborn. She's literally from birth been groomed to become a ruler, and then after being told that she was going to be a ruler, had to fight by the skin of her teeth to be able to retain this power that she has literally been born to. And of course she keeps her feelings close to her chest. Her literal mother was murdered by her father, the man who should be protecting her. And she's had to fight him and his corrupted Senate and all of the soldiers in his employ, and frankly, just about all of her maids as well, because what if they're accidentally in his employ and being double agents, etc.? Just to have a say in a position and be more than a figurehead in this land that relies on her for its entire existence. She's in an exceedingly isolating situation, and even so, in this difficult place that she finds herself in, despite all of the bad and morally wrong things that she has to do just in order to stay alive, she is still like a beautiful soul, a vulnerable person who is open to and accepting of love, and who is able and willing to give that love back 100-fold when she sees it. Watching Tobias fall in love with her, from her point of view, was nothing short of just absolute beauty, and it's everything that she deserves. Also, as I said before, Tobias is hot now. When I was reading him from his point of view, like he was cool and an interesting protagonist to follow, but from Layla's point of view, he's an absolute smoke show, and that's just been a delightful thing to experience. I love how into him she is, and I love how reciprocated it is. They have such a healthy, beautiful dynamic that's a pleasure to read about no matter which point of view you're looking at it from. They still definitely have their points of clashing, but I think the two of them, as the story goes on, are going to be able to work through their conflicts as long as they can get their communication a little bit higher up to par. Further speaking of Layla, but using her as sort of a lens to look at other characters, I really enjoyed seeing the other men of the tournament from her point of view. She and Tobias had a lot of places of agreement. Not difficult considering many, if not most, of the other tournament boys were assholes of varying degrees. But what I really enjoyed seeing is the slightly more important men of the tournament, whose names I won't reveal in case of spoilers. I loved seeing where their opinions on these men contrasted. Not only because it paints a more clear picture of who Tobias and Layla are as people, but because it also, because we're getting multiple views on this person, paints a more clear and well-rounded picture of the secondary character as well. Somebody who Tobias sees as an intelligent and capable ally, Layla might see as cruel and calculating. Somebody Tobias sees as a dangerous and absolutely horrifying threat, Layla might see as a father figure. And getting these disparate views of these characters fleshed them out in a way that I felt was a little bit lacking in TSC, but was very much enjoyed and very agreeable in TSS. That said, some of the more new characters, such as certain senators, certain palace staff, etc., people that Tobias wouldn't have interacted with until later in his story, if at all, that we only got from Layla's point of view, Many of them felt a little bit more two-dimensional, like certain tournament boys did in the first book. I realize this is going to be a consequence of having an enormous cast of characters and a story with as big a scope as this one does. Not everyone can get page time. We fully cannot know everything about everyone, but certain senators, for example, weren't seen as intelligent or, burly and strong or otherwise threatening as they perhaps should have been seen as. And that goes back to the plot issue of, I wish those moments of political intrigue were expanded upon, and that we got to see those characters developed even in Layla's point of view a little bit more fully. That said, because we were looking at things through Layla's point of view, and because this is a third-person limited narrative, if that's all that she really saw of them, I trust Jenna as a storyteller enough to imagine that that's fine. At this point, 2 books in, I trust that if a character is important enough that they're going to have lasting impact throughout the series, or at least another book or so in, they're going to be more fleshed out than the red shirts will. It did make it a little easier to figure out who was eventually going to be gotten rid of and who was probably going to stick around a little bit longer. But ultimately, that's not an issue, and I did enjoy seeing it. Another facet of character I really enjoyed seeing was Layla's sisters, Pippa and Delphi especially, but also Cosima. I'm always a fan of narratives that have women supporting other women and a deep love and sisterhood between ladies that isn't just sort of centered around the men in their lives, and these girls did not disappoint. I love Pippa so dearly, and I hope nothing bad ever happens to her, because if it will, I personally maybe will never recover. But my favorite relationship by far has to be the one between Delphi and Layla. They are sisters, not just in name, in everything except for blood. I think that the ride or die nature that they have for one another, their shared desire to make the world a better place, the world of Thesson, of course, and their deep abiding love and trust in one another is one of the most beautiful friendships I've read about in a very long time. I think they balance each other out quite well, and every interaction between them just made my heart absolutely sing. One thing I will say about the sisters, and I didn't really know where to put this, but it is a thing that I kind of wanted to address because it rubbed me the wrong way just a little bit, was that it felt as though Cosima was slut-shamed for exhibiting similar behaviors as the one Delphi was exhibiting. Now, I don't believe that slut-shaming should happen to anyone, man, woman, non-binary person, agender person, ever, whether they are aligned with Team Good or whether they are a villain, because ultimately it does sort of seem as though promiscuity, if you're a bad guy, is like the worst thing in the world. Like, their villainy should stand on its own without having sexual desire also being part of that villainy and sort of tied into their villainy. And I think that at least in Cosima's case, it a little bit was, and that did not sit great with me. I do appreciate there being the counterbalance of Delphi and several of the other servant girls who Layla is relatively close to, having and experiencing and acting upon their sexual desire in a very healthy, positive light. I appreciate that as a counterbalance to Cosima, but again, and maybe I'm just oversensitive about it, seeing it at all as like a marker of villainy, or as like something that can be tallied into the she is a bad person because XYZ board just didn't sit right with me. She's bad for other reasons. We don't have to slut shame her. She's allowed to have sex and also be a bad person, and have those two things not be conflated. But I don't want to end the review on that. I want to end it on something positive, because the book to me ultimately was a deeply positive experience. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Layla relationship, because no, I will never shut up about it. Getting to see both sides of their falling in love in relatively quick succession, because I did read TSC in preparation of reading TSS, because I thought it would give me a sort of greater understanding of the story if it was fresh in my mind. So getting to see both of their sides of their love story in such quick succession made me exceedingly happy and exceedingly warm in my heart in a way that I didn't really feel for most of the year 2020. Sometimes it's hard to find moments of good in dark times. That is a truth for me now as a human person existing as a citizen of our world, as much as it is true for both Layla and Tobias in their individual stories and their shared story in their world of Thesson. So I do want to end this review by saying that the hope found in these books, alongside the breakneck pace of a whirlwind adventure story, aside from the dark magics and gore and political intrigue and difficult, gritty fantasy setting, the ultimate takeaway, at least for me, of this story was hope and a bright spot of light in the darkness. And it's because of that feeling, it's because of that vibe that the story has left me with and that I've carried ever since finishing it. It's because of those things that I will be picking up this story again and again, and that I super recommend that you do too. The Savior Sister is now available for purchase at almost any online major retailer. I have links in the description box below where you can pick it up in hardcover, paperback, and ebook format. I'm pretty sure an audiobook is on the way. And if you haven't yet read The Savior's Champion, I will have links in the description box below where you can also purchase it, also in paperback, hardback, ebook, and audio. Whether you've read TSC and are thinking about picking up TSS, or you haven't read any of the series at all, I deeply encourage you to do so. It is a beautiful, wonderful love story that will also have you at the edge of your seat as a fantasy adventure as well. And I hope that you get from it the exact same level of joy that I did. So there you have it. That is my review of The Savior's Sister by Jenna Moreci. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up. And if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every weekend, and I would love to have you become part of my little booktube family. Comment down below if you've read TSS, because I do need to have a deep, spoilery, gushy talk about it with somebody who loved it as much as I did. So if that sounds like you, please let me know. And like, wherever you want to talk, Discord, Voxer, Twitter DMs, let me know, because I just need somebody to scream about this story with. But until then, that is it for me. Thank you again so much for watching this video, and I will see you with another one very soon. Goodbye.